There are wonders in our world that announce themselves with thunder. The great pyramids that pierce the desert sky. The colossal walls that snake across jagged mountains. The canyons carved by rivers over millennia. They are grand statements of power, of time, of brute force. We can stand before them and feel small, but there are other wonders, quieter wonders. They do not shout for our attention, they whisper. They are found not in the monumental, but in the minute, in the intricate geometry of a snowflake, in the iridescent shimmer of a hummingbird's wing, and, as our story tonight will reveal, in a single, continuous thread, spun by the humblest of creatures. This thread is a paradox. It is delicate enough to be broken by a careless hand, yet strong enough to build empires and weave the fabric of history itself. It is a testament to the idea that the most profound changes often begin with the softest of touches. So, find your place of rest. Allow the weight of the day to dissolve. Tonight, we follow this single, shimmering thread back to its mythical source, back to a time when the world was new, and its greatest secrets were still waiting, patiently to be discovered. This is the story of silk. Before we can truly appreciate the miracle of silk, let us linger for a moment in the world that existed without it, a world clothed in the earth's rougher offerings. Imagine the feel of early fabrics, the coarse touch of wool, sheared from sheep, thick and heavy. It was a fabric of pure function, a shield against the biting wind and the winter's chill. It was dependable, yes, but it was also itchy, cumbersome, carrying the faint, earthy scent of the flock. Imagine linen, born from the flax plant, a fabric of patience, requiring the stalks to be retted in water, beaten, and spun. It was cooler than wool, lighter, a welcome relief in the summer sun. Yet it wrinkled with every movement, a testament to its rigid, vegetable origins. It was clean, crisp, but it lacked a certain life, a certain flow. And then there were the hides and leathers, the first garments of humankind, the skins of animals, cured and treated to protect the hunter from the elements. They were strong, durable, a second skin of pure survival, but they were heavy, stiff, a constant reminder of the struggle between man and nature. This was the texture of the ancient world, a world of practicality, of necessity. Clothing was armor, it was shelter, it was a barrier between the soft vulnerability of human skin and the harshness of reality. Beauty existed, of course, in dyes made from berries and roots, in patterns stitched with bone needles, but the very substance of their clothing was grounded, earthy, and unyielding. There was no fabric that could flow like water, or catch the light like a trapped sunbeam. There was no thread that felt like a whisper against the skin. The world, in all its ruggedness, was waiting. It did not know what it was waiting for, but in a quiet garden in the heart of ancient China, a revelation was about to unfold. Let us travel now, in our minds, across the veil of time, to the 27th century before the Common Era. We arrive in a place of perfect tranquility, the imperial garden of the Yellow Emperor, Huangdi, a patriarch of Chinese civilization. Do not picture a garden of rigid, manicured lines. Picture instead a landscape painting come to life. A gentle stream murmurs over smooth gray stones. Willow trees weep their green fronds towards the water's edge. A crooked stone bridge arches gracefully over a pond where koi carp, like living jewels of orange and gold, drift lazily beneath lily pads. The air itself is thick with the scent of jasmine and lotus blossom, a sweet, intoxicating perfume. And above all, there is the gentle, constant rustle of leaves, the leaves of the sacred mulberry tree. And it is here, beneath one of these trees, that our story truly begins. Here sits the Empress Leizu. She is not depicted as a distant, untouchable monarch. She is a figure of quiet contemplation. Imagine her seated on a woven mat, the world around her at peace. In her hands, she cradles a delicate ceramic cup, its surface painted with the image of a dragon. Steam rises from the cup in a fragrant, twisting column, carrying the subtle aroma of green tea leaves. The warmth of it is a small, pleasant anchor in the vast stillness of the afternoon. She is lost in thought, perhaps contemplating the changing of the seasons, the affairs of the court, or simply enjoying the profound peace of her surroundings. The world slows down. The chirping of a distant cicada, the gentle buzz of a bee, the soft whisper of the wind through the mulberry leaves. And then it happens. A tiny disturbance, not a crash or a shout, but a small, soft plop. Something has fallen from the branches above, breaking the perfect surface of her tea. She looks down. Floating in the golden-green liquid is a small, white, oblong object. It is a cocoon. Perhaps she has seen thousands of them before, clinging to the branches of the mulberry trees. An ordinary thing, but in this moment, it is transformed. The heat of the tea, a catalyst of fate, begins to work its magic. It softens the gummy protein, the sericin, that binds the cocoon together, and from the tiny, sodden pod, a single, ethereal filament begins to lift away, catching the sunlight. It looks like a strand of a spider's web, but it possesses a light, a luster that is almost otherworldly. Curiosity, the mother of all discovery, takes hold of the Empress. She sets her cup down. With the elegant precision of her long fingernails, she pinches the end of this magical thread, and she begins to pull. She pulls, gently at first, then with more confidence. The thread does not break. It unspools from the cocoon in a single, unbroken line. It is a river of liquid moonlight flowing through her fingers. She pulls and pulls, the cocoon bobbing and turning in the warm water, giving up its hidden treasure. It feels impossibly soft, yet impossibly strong. The length of it is astonishing. It seems to have no end. Meter after meter of shimmering, pearlescent filament is drawn from that one small pod until it lies in a glistening pool on the dark wood of the table beside her. Legend says that single thread stretched for almost 1,000 meters. In the quiet of that afternoon garden, with the simple elements of a tree, a cocoon, and a cup of hot tea, the world had changed forever. A secret, held by nature for millions of years, had finally been whispered to humanity. That single, magical thread could have remained a mere curiosity, a strange and beautiful anecdote to be told at court. But the Empress Leizu, as the legend portrays her, possessed more than just curiosity. She possessed a keen and patient intellect. The wonder of that afternoon did not fade with the setting sun. It ignited a quest for understanding. Imagine her, in the days that followed, returning to that same mulberry tree. She was no longer just an empress enjoying her garden. She was a naturalist, an investigator. She would have gathered more cocoons, dozens of them, from the leaves and branches. She would have felt their texture, light and papery, yet firm. She would have taken them back to her chambers, experimenting with water of different temperatures, discovering that gentle heat was the key to unlocking the thread without breaking it. Her focus then would have shifted from the cocoon itself to its creator, the bombyx mori, the silkworm. She would have watched them, these small, pale, unassuming caterpillars. She would have observed their singular, voracious appetite. They ate nothing, absolutely nothing, but the leaves of the white mulberry tree. This was the first crucial piece of the puzzle. The worm and the tree were inextricably linked. Picture her dedicating a part of the palace grounds to a controlled experiment. A grove of mulberry trees, carefully tended. She would have watched the entire life cycle of the creature unfold, from the tiny, pinprick eggs to the hatching of the small, black worms. She would have listened to the sound of a room full of them, the soft, uniform rustle of tens of thousands of tiny mandibles chewing through mulberry leaves. A sound, it is said, like gentle rain falling on a roof. She would have marveled at how they grew, shedding their skin multiple times, becoming pale and plump. And then, the most magical part of the process. When a worm was ready, it would stop eating. It would lift its head, searching for a place to anchor itself, and it would begin to spin. She would have watched, mesmerized, as the worm extruded 2 streams of liquid protein from its glands. As these streams hit the air, they fused into one, the single, solid filament we call silk. The worm would perform a slow, rhythmic dance, a figure of 8 motion of its head, over and over, for 3 days and 3 nights, encasing itself in a protective tomb of its own creation, a tomb that was also a treasure. Through this patient observation, Leizu moved from mythology to methodology. She understood that to have the thread, one must first cultivate the worm. To cultivate the worm, one must first cultivate the tree. It was a trinity of nature: tree, worm, and thread. And with this wisdom, she laid the foundations for an art form that would define her civilization for millennia to come: the art of sericulture. This was not a simple process. It was a ritual, a delicate ballet of human intervention and natural wonder, passed down through generations. It began with the mulberry groves. They were not wild forests, but carefully tended orchards. The trees were kept low, almost like shrubs, to make the harvesting of their leaves easier. The health of the leaves was paramount, for they were the only food the silkworms would accept. Inside, in long, low buildings, were the silkworm palaces, trays stacked in racks from floor to ceiling, each holding thousands of worms. The rooms were kept meticulously clean, the temperature and humidity carefully controlled. The silkworms were fragile creatures, susceptible to noise, drafts, and even strong smells. Their caretakers, mostly women, moved with a quiet grace, their lives revolving around the rhythms of these small creatures. Their first duty of the day was to feed them. Heaping piles of freshly chopped mulberry leaves were spread across the trays. The sound of munching would fill the air, a constant, gentle white noise. The worms ate almost continuously for a month, growing up to 10,000 times their original weight. When the worms were ready to spin, they were moved to special frames, with a lattice of twigs or straw for them to attach to. For 3 days, the spinning rooms would be filled with the silent, tireless work of transformation. Then came the harvest. The cocoons were gathered, light as air. But here, a moment of profound, quiet sadness entered the process. To preserve the unbroken thread, the pupa inside could not be allowed to hatch. If the moth were to emerge, it would break a hole in the cocoon, shattering the continuous filament into countless useless pieces. So, the cocoons were stifled, using steam or baking them in heat, a necessary sacrifice for the sake of the thread. Then began the work of reeling. The cocoons were plunged into basins of hot water to soften the sericin glue. A worker, with impossibly nimble fingers, would stir the cocoons with a small brush, catching the almost invisible ends of the filaments. She would find the ends of several cocoons, perhaps 5, perhaps 8, and feed them together onto a spinning reel. As the reel turned, it drew the filaments from the cocoons in the hot water, combining them into a single, raw silk thread, strong and ready for the loom. It was an act of profound patience. From the planting of a tree to the weaving of a cloth, the process could take months. It required a deep understanding of nature and a gentle, guiding hand. It was an industry built on whispers, on quiet observation, and on the accumulated wisdom of countless generations. And the fabric that emerged from this ritual, it was alchemy. It was a physical manifestation of the civilization that created it. Patient, sophisticated, and deeply connected to the natural world. In these nascent years of Chinese history, silk was not a commodity. It was sacred. It was the cloth of emperors and empresses, a shimmering barrier that separated the divine rulers from the common folk. To be wrapped in silk was to be wrapped in power, in legitimacy. The earliest laws were written not on paper, but on scrolls of silk. The wisdom of philosophers, the edicts of emperors, all entrusted to this luminous fabric. This thread, born from a worm in a quiet garden, had now woven itself into the very soul of the empire. It was their art, their currency, their symbol of identity, and because it was so precious, it had to be protected. The art of sericulture became China's most guarded secret, a secret held so tightly that the mere act of smuggling a silkworm egg or a mulberry seed across the border was a crime punishable by death. For now, the river of moonlight flowed only within the borders of the Middle Kingdom, a treasure held in the cupped hands of an empire. But a secret of such profound beauty cannot be contained forever by walls of stone or by imperial decree. It does not need an army to carry it forth. Its reputation travels on its own, like a subtle, intoxicating perfume on the wind, drifting over the highest mountain passes and across the most desolate of sands, reaching the ears of distant kings and merchants in lands still clothed in the humble roughness of wool and flax. These were whispers at first, fragmented tales told by travelers of a fabric that shone like water and felt like a cloud, a cloth so light it could be pulled through a finger ring, yet so strong it was used for bowstrings and fishing lines. To a world of coarse textures, such a thing sounded not like a product of man, but a creation of magic. And with those whispers, a great and powerful yearning was born, a yearning that would challenge deserts, conquer mountains, and connect civilizations, a yearning that would soon carve a path across the face of the earth, not with swords or shields, but with the simple, irresistible pull of a single, shimmering thread. And so, a yearning was born, a great and powerful pull from the world beyond the borders. But to understand the road that this yearning would eventually create, we must first understand the nature of the walls it had to overcome. Not just the physical walls of stone and earth, but the invisible walls of law, of culture, and of fear that guarded the cradle of silk. A secret of this magnitude is not kept by chance. It becomes a living entity within the empire, a silent, watchful presence. It was an oath sworn in the heart of every weaver whose fingers danced across the loom, a vow of silence passed from mother to daughter, alongside the knowledge of how to tend to the delicate worms. It was a duty instilled in every guard who stood watch over the vast, rustling green seas of the mulberry groves, their eyes trained not just for thieves of property, but for thieves of knowledge. The secret was layered, like the very cocoons it sought to protect. The outer layer was the law, stark and absolute. The imperial edict was clear. Anyone caught smuggling the eggs of the silkworm, the seeds of the mulberry tree, or the knowledge of their cultivation out of the Middle Kingdom, would face the ultimate penalty, death. It was a punishment designed not just to stop the individual, but to send a chilling message to all who might be tempted. But beneath the layer of law was a far more powerful guardian, culture. To the people of ancient China, silk was not merely a product. It was a gift from their ancestors, a blessing from the heavens, revealed to their own empress. It was intrinsically tied to their identity, their sense of superiority and sophistication. To share this secret with the barbarians of the outside world, the people clothed in rough wool and animal hides, would be more than just treason. It would be a betrayal of their heritage, a dilution of their own sacred essence. And so, the secret was kept not just by the force of the sword, but by the force of pride. Within these carefully guarded borders, silk was not a luxury. It was the very language of power. It was a visual hierarchy, a silent declaration of one's place in the cosmic order, understood by all. Let us transport ourselves to the heart of this empire. The imperial palace. A city within a city, a labyrinth of grand halls, serene courtyards, and private chambers. Here, the emperor, the son of heaven, was the sun around which the entire universe revolved, and his divinity was made manifest in silk. Imagine his ceremonial robes. Do not picture a simple garment. Picture a wearable work of art, a map of the cosmos. The fabric itself was the finest possible weave, a shimmering liquid gold, a shade of yellow, so vibrant and pure, it was forbidden for anyone else in the empire to wear, under penalty of death. Upon this golden canvas, artisans worked for months, even years, with needles finer than a human hair. They embroidered celestial symbols in threads of peacock blue, crimson, and emerald green. A great 5-clawed dragon, the emblem of the emperor himself, would coil around the robe, its scales shimmering, its eyes seeming to hold an ancient wisdom. Constellations were stitched across the shoulders, mountains rose from the hem, and waves crashed around the ankles. When the emperor moved, the robe did not merely hang, it flowed, it whispered, it held the light of 100 candles in a darkened hall. To look upon it was to look upon the authority of the divine made tangible. From this radiant center, the use of silk cascaded outwards in meticulously defined ripples. His empress and favored concubines wore silks of astonishing beauty, often embroidered with the graceful phoenix. The highest ministers and civil servants were granted robes of specific colors and patterns, signifying their rank. A scholar official might wear a serene blue, embroidered with the image of a crane, symbolizing wisdom and longevity. A military general might wear a deeper, more imposing shade, marked with a tiger or a lion, representing strength. One could tell, simply by the color and quality of a person's silk garment as they passed in a corridor, their entire station in life. It was a system more immediate and more powerful than any written title, but the influence of silk stretched far beyond clothing. The most important imperial edicts, the laws that governed millions of lives, were not written on bamboo strips or common paper, but painted with delicate brushstrokes onto scrolls of the finest white silk. The fabric lent a weight, a permanence, a sense of profound importance to the words it carried. The armies of the empire marched under banners of silk, great flowing rectangles of crimson and gold that snapped and billowed in the wind. They were light enough to be carried with ease, yet strong enough to withstand the elements. They were a terrifying, beautiful sight to their enemies, a symbol of the empire's wealth and organizational might. Even in moments of leisure, silk was present. Ladies of the court cooled themselves with fans made of stretched silk, painted with delicate landscapes or poems. Musicians played instruments whose strings were made of twisted silk, producing sounds of a unique and resonant purity. The very walls of the most opulent chambers were often not painted, but hung with vast tapestries of embroidered silk, depicting scenes from mythology, great battles, or serene natural landscapes. These were not mere decorations. They were stories, histories, woven into the very fabric of their lives. To live within the palace walls was to live in a world defined, colored, and textured by silk. It was the air they breathed, the language they spoke, the foundation upon which their power was built. As the empire's control over silk production solidified, this remarkable fabric began to take on a role that transcended even its symbolic power. It became a form of wealth itself, a currency more portable and, in many cases, more desirable than precious metals. Imagine a provincial governor needing to pay his taxes to the imperial capital, transporting wagon loads of heavy bronze coins over vast distances, through treacherous mountain passes and across wide rivers, was a logistical nightmare, vulnerable to bandits and accidents. But silk was different. A single bolt of the highest quality woven silk was light, compact, and held immense value. It could be rolled, packed, and transported with relative ease. The empire began to accept, and even demand, tax payments in the form of silk. It was a stable, state-controlled commodity, its value absolute. Soldiers guarding the distant frontiers were often paid their salaries not in coin, but in rations of silk. They, in turn, could use this silk to trade for goods and services with local communities. Silk became a de facto currency, a standardized unit of exchange. It was soft gold, but its most potent use was as a tool of foreign policy. The empire was surrounded by nomadic tribes, fierce horsemen from the northern steppes, mountain kingdoms to the west. These groups were a constant potential threat. They could be fought with armies of iron and steel, a costly, bloody affair, or they could be tamed with silk. Picture a chieftain of one of these tribes, a man who has spent his life on the windswept plains, his world defined by the rugged texture of leather, fur, and coarse wool. An envoy from the Chinese emperor arrives at his camp. There are no threats, no displays of military might. Instead, the envoy presents a gift. A chest is opened. Inside, nestled in soft padding, lies a bolt of silk, perhaps a deep, royal blue, the color of the sky at dusk. The chieftain reaches out a hand, calloused from holding the reins of his horse and the grip of his sword. He touches the fabric. His reaction would be one of pure, unadulterated awe. He has never felt anything like it. It is impossibly smooth, impossibly light. He holds it up, and it catches the firelight in a way that seems magical, alive. This single gift was a display of wealth and sophistication so far beyond his own experience that it was utterly disarming. It was a clear, unspoken message. We come from a world that can create such wonders. It is better to be our friend than our enemy. Time and again, the empire used silk in this way. They traded it for the powerful horses of the steppe nomads, which they needed for their cavalry. They used it to pacify restless neighbors, to reward loyalty, and to create a web of dependency. It was the ultimate tool of soft power. A thread of silk could often achieve what a legion of soldiers could not. It could conquer the hearts and minds of potential foes, binding them to the empire not with chains of iron, but with threads of shimmering, irresistible beauty. And yet, The more silk was used as a tool to interact with the outside world, the more the secret was put at risk. Every gift given, every bolt traded for a horse, was a seed of desire planted in foreign soil. The legend of the magical cloth began to solidify into tangible proof. Merchants from Persia, India, and the burgeoning Roman sphere began to hear credible tales. They saw it with their own eyes in the border markets, and they wanted more. The first silk to leave China was likely not part of a grand scheme. Imagine a soldier on the Great Wall, trading a small, illicit piece of silk for a pouch of exotic spices from a passing caravan, or a minor official bribed with jade from the West, looking the other way as a single, precious bolt was hidden amongst a cartload of other goods. These were small, individual acts of human weakness, greed, or simply curiosity. But they were the first cracks in the dam. When these first pieces of silk reached the bustling markets of the West, they caused a sensation unlike any other. Imagine a wealthy Roman senator's wife in a marketplace in Antioch or Alexandria. She is surrounded by the finest goods the world has to offer: fine Egyptian linen, deep purple dyes from Tyre, fragrant spices from the Arabian Peninsula, and then a merchant, with a conspiratorial whisper, unveils his prize, a piece of Chinese silk. She touches it. The experience is revelatory. It renders all other fabrics coarse and common by comparison. The price he asks is astronomical, its weight in gold, and she pays it without hesitation. The demand that followed was not a trickle. It was a flood. The Roman elite became consumed by a passion for silk, which they called sericum. It was the ultimate status symbol. To wear it was to display a level of wealth that bordered on the divine. Moralists and philosophers like Seneca the Younger would decry it, complaining that this translucent, revealing fabric was indecent, that it drained the empire's coffers of gold, which flowed eastwards and never returned. But their protestations were useless. The desire was too strong, and so the pressure on China's borders began to mount. The whispers that had once traveled on the wind had now become a roar, a collective, insatiable demand from half a world away. The secret was still held, the law was still absolute, but the forces of global commerce were now gathering like a great storm on the horizon. The world did not just want China's treasure anymore. The world needed it, and this great, global need, this immense, invisible pull from the West, was about to create something that would change the world forever. A bridge of commerce and ideas, a path paved with desire, a road that would come to be known by the name of the very treasure it was built to carry. And so, this great, global need, this immense, invisible pull from the West, began to exert its gravitational force. A road is not always made by design. It is not always paved with stones and marked by signposts. Sometimes, a road is simply born from the collective will of 1,000 journeys. It is a path worn into the earth by the patient, persistent footsteps of those driven by desire. This was how the Silk Road began. It was not a single road, but a sprawling, shifting network of trails, a great, braided artery of commerce and culture that pulsed across the heart of Asia. It stretched for over 4,000 miles, connecting the grand capital of China in the east with the shores of the Mediterranean Sea in the west. It was a bridge built not of wood or stone, but of human ambition, a testament to the idea that no mountain is too high and no desert too vast to stand in the way of a story that the world is desperate to hear. Our story now leaves the confines of the imperial court and joins the dust and the wind of this legendary path. We join the dream of the caravan, a dream of unimaginable wealth and of survival. Let us begin where so many of these journeys did, in the magnificent city of Chang'an, the capital of the Han Dynasty, the easternmost terminus of the road. Imagine this city. It is not a provincial town, but a thriving metropolis, one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities on Earth at the time. Its walls are thick and high, built of rammed earth, enclosing a perfectly planned grid of streets and avenues. The air hums with the energy of 1,000,000 people. Here, the journey truly begins, not in the wilderness, but in the meticulous act of preparation. In the sprawling western market of Chang'an, a controlled chaos reigns. The scent of spices from lands yet unseen mingles with the earthy smell of livestock and the sharp tang of metal being forged. The air is a cacophony of languages, the melodic tones of Mandarin Chinese blending with the guttural dialects of Sogdian merchants, the clipped speech of military officials, and the quiet bartering of Tibetan traders. This is the gathering point. Here, a wealthy merchant, his face etched with the lines of past journeys, oversees the loading of his caravan. His most precious cargo, of course, is the silk. It is not packed carelessly. Each bolt is wrapped in protective layers of oiled paper and then sewn into thick canvas sacks. These precious bundles are then loaded onto the backs of the true heroes of the Silk Road, the Bactrian camels. Picture these magnificent creatures. They are not the single-humped dromedaries of Arabia, but the two-humped giants of Central Asia. Their shaggy, thick coats protect them from both the searing heat of the desert sun and the biting cold of the mountain nights. Their wide, padded feet are perfectly designed to walk upon shifting sands. They can carry immense loads, and, most remarkably, they can endure for days, even weeks, with little water, sustained by the fat stored in their humps. They are patient, resilient, living ships of the desert, and without them, the road would not exist. The merchant hires his crew with care. A caravan master, an old, weather-beaten man whose eyes hold the memory of 100 crossings. He knows the location of every hidden well. He can read the stars to navigate, and he can sense a coming sandstorm in the shifting color of the sky. He hires guards, hardened soldiers armed with crossbows and long spears, their task to protect the caravan from the ever-present threat of bandits who haunt the lawless territories between oases. He hires cameleers, men who understand the moods and needs of their animals, as if they were their own children. The preparation takes weeks. Food, water, fodder for the animals, goods for trade. Every detail is meticulously planned. For on the Silk Road, a forgotten water skin or a miscalculation of distance could be the difference between life and death. Finally, the day comes. With the first light of dawn, the great gates of the city swing open. The long line of camels, linked together, groans to its feet. Bells tied to their harnesses chime softly, and the caravan, a self-contained, moving world, shuffles out of the safety of Chang'an and into the vast, unforgiving unknown. Their first great trial is a place of legends and nightmares, the Taklamakan Desert. Its name, in the local Uyghur language, is often translated as, "You can get in, but you can never get out." It is one of the largest sandy deserts in the world, an ocean of shifting, crescent-shaped dunes that stretch to every horizon. The caravan enters this place, and the world is reduced to two colors, the pale, endless yellow of the sand, and the vast, indifferent blue of the sky above. The sun is a merciless white-hot furnace. The heat radiates up from the ground in shimmering waves, creating mirages, phantom lakes that glitter in the distance, promising water that does not exist. The caravan master knows not to trust them. The days are spent in a slow, shuffling rhythm. The soft, plodding footsteps of the camels, the groan of leather saddles, the soft chime of the bells. Conversation dies down, replaced by a shared, silent endurance. The world becomes a walking meditation. At night, the desert transforms. The crushing heat gives way to a sudden piercing cold. The sky, free from the haze of cities, becomes a canopy of impossible brilliance. The Milky Way is not a faint band of light, but a thick, luminous river of stars, so bright it seems you could reach out and touch it. The caravan makes camp. Fires are lit, fueled by the dry scrub brush they carry with them. The smell of cooking food is a small, welcome comfort. The camels kneel in a circle, their grumbling sighs a strangely reassuring sound in the immense silence. But the silence is rarely absolute. There is the wind. The wind of the Taklamakan is a living entity. It whispers, it moans, it sculpts the dunes into ever-changing shapes, and sometimes it screams. A sandstorm is the desert's greatest weapon. It begins as a dark line on the horizon. The caravan master shouts the warning. The cameleers force the camels to their knees, huddling them together to form a living wall. The men cover their faces, hiding behind the animals, as the world dissolves into a roaring, blinding chaos of wind and sand. The sun vanishes. The sky turns a sickly, oppressive brown. The sand gets into everything. Their eyes, their mouths, their clothes. All they can do is wait and hope. When the storm passes, the landscape may be utterly transformed. Dunes that were once landmarks have vanished. New ones have appeared. The path is gone. This is when they rely on the stars and on the grim signposts left by those who came before. Here and there, bleached by the sun, are the skeletons of camels and humans, travelers who lost their way, ran out of water, or were caught in a storm. They are a silent, stark reminder of the desert's unforgiving nature. The caravan passes them with a quiet reverence. Each skeleton is a story, a warning. a monument to a dream that ended here, in the sea of death. After weeks in the monochrome emptiness of the desert, a new color appears on the horizon, a smudge of green. As the caravan draws closer, the smudge grows, resolving itself into the impossible sight of trees, of life. They have reached an oasis, and at the heart of the oasis is a city, a jewel strung on the dusty thread of the Silk Road. A city like Kashgar or Samarkand. Imagine the caravan's arrival. The slow, weary shuffling gives way to a surge of renewed energy. The sight of the city's high mud brick walls and towering minarets is like a vision of paradise. They pass through the city gates, and their senses are overwhelmed. After the silence of the desert, there is the vibrant sound of life, the clamor of the marketplace, the call to prayer from a mosque, the sound of a blacksmith's hammer, the laughter of children. After the scent of dust and sand, there is the rich aroma of civilization, the smell of baking bread, of roasting lamb seasoned with cumin and cardamom, the sweet perfume of fruit orchards. After the endless yellow and blue, there is a riot of color. Piles of vibrant red pomegranates, deep purple grapes, and golden apricots in the market stalls. The brilliant turquoise tiles of a mosque dome shimmering in the sun. The colorful clothing of the city's inhabitants, a blend of a dozen different cultures. These oasis cities were the hearts of the Silk Road. They were melting pots, where East met West for the first time. Here, our Chinese merchant would set up his stall in the caravanserai, a large, fortified inn built around a central courtyard. He would unroll his bolts of silk. Local rulers, wealthy Persian traders, and even envoys from the distant Roman world would come to see his wares. They would haggle, not in a single language, but through a chain of translators, or in the pidgin dialects of the road. The silk would be traded, not just for gold and silver, but for the treasures of the West. Strong, magnificent horses from the Fergana Valley, fine, patterned carpets from Persia, shimmering glassware from Roman Syria, exotic spices, jade, and even ideas. The caravan would rest here for weeks, replenishing their supplies, repairing their equipment, and trading their goods. It was a time of recovery and of profound exchange. But the journey was far from over. Leaving the relative comfort of the oasis, the road began to climb. It wound its way into the towering, formidable mountain ranges, the Pamirs, the roof of the world. The challenges here were different, but no less deadly. The searing heat of the desert was replaced by a brutal, bone-chilling cold. The air grew thin, making every breath a conscious effort. The wide, open sands were replaced by narrow, treacherous paths carved into the sides of cliffs, with a sheer drop of thousands of feet to the valley below. A single misstep by a camel could send precious cargo and life plunging into the abyss. Avalanches were a constant threat, their thunderous roar echoing through the silent peaks. And yet, the beauty was as extreme as the danger. The caravan moved through a world of stark, majestic grandeur, snow-capped peaks, so high they seemed to scrape the heavens, glaciers of ancient blue ice that groaned and shifted, eagles soaring on the thermal updrafts. Here, the world felt new, primordial, untouched. It was a journey through the very bones of the earth. And as the caravan finally descended from these great heights into the lands of Persia and beyond, it carried more than just silk. It had become a vessel of transformation. The ideas, technologies, and beliefs it encountered in the oasis cities were now traveling with it. Buddhist monks from India traveled eastward along the road, carrying their philosophy into China. The Chinese art of papermaking traveled westward, eventually revolutionizing the recording of knowledge in Europe. Art styles, musical instruments, scientific knowledge, and even diseases all flowed in both directions along this great artery. The Silk Road was not just a trade route. It was the world's first great information superhighway, a physical network that connected the minds of humanity, weaving them together, just as the loom weaves individual threads into a single, magnificent cloth. The dream of the caravan was ultimately the dream of a connected world. The dream of a connected world, woven by the Silk Road, had one profound, unintended consequence. It exposed the full extent of the West's obsession with silk and the staggering amount of wealth that flowed eastward to pay for it. Far to the west, another great power watched this phenomenon with a mixture of awe and deep concern. This was the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as Byzantium, with its magnificent capital at Constantinople. For centuries, the Romans and their Byzantine successors had been the final and most voracious consumers of Chinese silk. Their senators, their aristocrats, their empresses, all draped themselves in the shimmering fabric, paying exorbitant prices set by the Persian merchants who acted as middlemen. The gold of the empire drained away in a steady, shimmering stream, traveling thousands of miles to an empire they knew only through legend, an empire that held the key to this magical cloth. The Emperor Justinian, a ruler of immense ambition and intelligence, saw this not just as an economic problem, but as a strategic vulnerability. His empire was locked in a near-constant state of conflict with the Sasanian Empire of Persia. The Persians controlled the western end of the Silk Road. They could, and often did, cut off the supply of silk at will, or inflate the prices to cripple the Byzantine economy. To Justinian, this was an intolerable situation. His empire, the heir to the glory of Rome, was dependent on its greatest rival for its most desired luxury. He realized that buying the silk was no longer enough. Byzantium had to create its own. But how? The secret of sericulture was the most closely guarded piece of industrial knowledge on the planet. The Chinese Empire had successfully protected it for over 3,000 years. Armies could not breach this secret. Diplomats could not negotiate for it. A new approach was needed, something quieter, more subtle, a plan that would not be carried out by soldiers in shining armor, but by humble figures, cloaked in piety, who could move across the world without attracting suspicion. The time for trade was ending. The time for espionage had begun. The agents chosen for this impossible mission were not what one might expect. They were not trained assassins or cunning courtiers. They were two Nestorian monks. Picture these men. They are older, their faces lined not by conflict, but by years of prayer and contemplation. Their robes are simple, coarse wool, a stark contrast to the very substance they were sent to acquire. They were part of a Christian sect that had spread eastward, establishing small communities and monasteries along the Silk Road. They had likely traveled the road before, preaching their faith, and their unassuming presence allowed them to be almost invisible. They were the perfect spies precisely because they did not look like spies at all. Legend tells that they had spent years in China. They were not there as prisoners, but as observers. They moved through the provinces where silk was made, their quiet, scholarly nature allowing them to witness what no Western merchant ever could. They did not ask direct, dangerous questions. Instead, they watched. They watched the patient work of the women in the silk villages. They saw the groves of low-cut mulberry trees, and understood that this specific tree was the only food source. They saw the life cycle of the worms, from the tiny eggs to the spinning of the cocoons. They saw the reeling process, the boiling water, the nimble fingers finding the single, precious thread. They were not just seeing a process, they were deconstructing a miracle, piece by piece, committing every detail to memory. They were creating a manual for an entire industry in their minds. After years of this silent observation, they knew they had learned enough. They understood the trinity of tree, worm, and thread. But knowledge alone was not enough. They could not simply describe the process to the emperor. They needed the source. They needed the living catalyst of the entire operation. They needed the eggs of the Bombyx mori. This was the most perilous part of their mission. The eggs themselves were tiny, almost like grains of sand or mustard seeds. They were easy to conceal. The true challenge was keeping them viable. These were not inert objects. They were living things. They needed to be kept at a specific, cool temperature to prevent them from hatching prematurely. If they hatched in the middle of the desert, the tiny worms would emerge, find no mulberry leaves, and perish within hours, rendering the entire mission a failure. The journey back to Constantinople would take many months, perhaps even years. The timing had to be perfect. The monks devised a plan of remarkable ingenuity. Their chosen vessel of concealment was an object of profound simplicity, an object that was a natural extension of themselves as wandering travelers. Their walking staves. Imagine the scene. In the dead of night, in a secluded corner of a monastery or a hidden room, the monks prepare. They have acquired a length of thick, hollow bamboo. Bamboo, with its naturally segmented interior, was the perfect choice. It was a natural insulator, protecting its contents from the extreme temperature fluctuations of the long journey. With great care, they would have opened one end of the staff. Inside, they would place a small, damp cloth to maintain a hint of humidity. Then came the most precious cargo in the world. Using a delicate brush or a pair of tweezers, they would transfer the silkworm eggs from a piece of paper or cloth into the hollow chamber. Thousands of them, a future industry held in the palm of a hand. Alongside the eggs, they placed another treasure just as vital, the seeds of the white mulberry tree. for they knew that the worms, upon hatching, would be useless without their sole source of food. They were not just stealing an animal. They were stealing an entire, self-contained ecosystem. Once the precious contents were secured, the staff was resealed, perhaps with a plug of wood disguised with dirt and wax. In the morning, the two men were just as they had always been, two humble monks, leaning on their simple bamboo staffs as they walked. The secret was now hidden in plain sight. They would pass by guards at city gates, and the guards would see only two holy men. They would share a fire with other travelers in a caravanserai, and the other travelers would see only the unassuming tools of a long pilgrimage. No one would ever suspect that the hollow bamboo canes they leaned on held the economic future of the Western world. No one would ever imagine that these simple sticks contained a secret that the Chinese Empire had guarded with its swords and its laws for 3,000 years. The journey back along the Silk Road was a reversal of the one we have already traveled, but it was fraught with a new kind of tension. Every day was a calculated risk. In the heat of the deserts of Persia and Mesopotamia, the monks would have done everything in their power to keep their staffs cool, perhaps burying them in the sand at night or wrapping them in damp cloths. As they climbed through the cold mountain passes of Anatolia, they had to protect them from freezing. They were no longer mere travelers. They were living incubators, shepherds of a fragile, sleeping generation. The psychological toll must have been immense. Every inspection at a border, every curious glance from a fellow traveler, every stumble on a rocky path must have sent a jolt of fear through them. The secret they carried was a silent weight in their hands. A single crack in the bamboo, a single moment of carelessness could unravel everything. Finally, after a journey that spanned continents and seasons, they saw it in the distance. The great walls of Constantinople, the golden dome of the Hagia Sophia, glittering in the sun. They had made it. They walked through the Golden Gate, two anonymous figures swallowed by the crowds of the greatest city in Christendom. They had brought no gold, no spices, no magnificent carpets, but in their hands they carried a gift for their emperor more valuable than all the treasures of the Silk Road combined. They carried the means of production. The heist was complete. The monks were brought before the Emperor Justinian. In the quiet of the imperial court, they told their story, and then they presented the bamboo canes. The canes were carefully opened, and inside, the Emperor and his most trusted advisors would have peered at the tiny, dust-like specks. It must have seemed almost anticlimactic. These small, dormant dots, were these the source of the legendary fabric? Was this the secret that had baffled empires for millennia? But Justinian understood. He listened intently as the monks explained everything they had learned: the cultivation of the mulberry trees, the delicate art of raising the worms, the precise method of reeling the silk. The seeds were planted in the fertile soil of Greece. The eggs were carefully tended by experts under the monks' guidance. And when the first mulberry leaves sprouted, and the first silkworms hatched on Byzantine soil, a new era began. The monopoly was broken. The secret was out. The thread that had once bound the world to China would now be woven in the West, and the legacy of that single audacious act of espionage would change the texture of the world forever. The legacy of that single audacious act of espionage began not with the sound of a trumpet, but with the quiet, rhythmic clatter of a loom in a heavily guarded workshop within the great palace of Constantinople. The first hanks of raw silk produced on Byzantine soil must have been a sight of profound triumph. Gleaming with a pale golden light, softer and more lustrous than anything the West had ever produced on its own. It was a victory not of arms, but of intellect and patience. The Emperor Justinian had not conquered a province. He had captured an entire industry. He established imperial workshops, known as the gynoecium, where the production of the finest silks was placed under direct state control. This was not to be a craft for common merchants. Once again, just as it had been in China, thousands of years before, silk became a tool of the state, an imperial monopoly. The very best weaves, especially those dyed with the incredibly rare and costly Tyrian purple, a color extracted from sea snails and reserved exclusively for the emperor, were known as forbidden cloths. To produce or wear them without imperial permission was an act of treason. But the Byzantine weavers did not simply copy the styles of the East. They infused the fabric with their own soul, their own worldview. While Chinese silk often depicted serene landscapes, dragons, and phoenixes, Byzantine silk became a canvas for the soaring iconography of the Christian faith. Imagine a vast silk tapestry, destined to hang behind the altar of the Hagia Sophia, woven with threads of gold and silver. It depicts the Christ Pantocrator, his gaze both stern and merciful. Or the Empress Theodora, her image immortalized in silk, her robes adorned with scenes from the Gospels. They created new patterns, majestic lions, powerful eagles, symbolizing the might of the Roman Empire, and intricate geometric designs that echoed the mosaics adorning their churches. Silk was no longer just a luxury. It was an expression of divine right, a sacred textile used to wrap holy relics, to serve as altar cloths, and to form the vestments of the highest patriarchs. The thread that had once carried the whispers of a Chinese goddess now carried the prayers of a Christian empire. For 2 centuries, Byzantium held its new secret close, replacing Persia as the great weaver of the Western world. But history has a recurring lesson. No secret, no matter how well guarded, can be held forever. The knowledge of sericulture, once stolen, had become a fugitive, and it was destined to continue its journey westward. Its next great leap was carried by the powerful tide of a new faith, Islam. As the Islamic caliphates expanded in the 7th and 8th centuries, they conquered the traditional silk-producing provinces of Persia and Byzantine Syria. They did not destroy the industry. They absorbed it, mastered it, and elevated it to new heights of artistic expression. Islamic weavers, forbidden by their faith from depicting human or animal forms in religious contexts, became masters of abstract design. Picture a workshop in Damascus or Baghdad. The looms here create silks of breathtaking complexity. Intricate geometric patterns, like starbursts and interlocking polygons, that spoke of a deep understanding of mathematics, and the infinite nature of God. Flowing, stylized calligraphy, weaving verses from the Quran into the very fabric itself, turning a garment into a prayer. The Arab world became the new center of silk innovation, and from here, the knowledge spread across North Africa and into Spain with the Moors. The city of Al-Andalus became a beacon of silk production in Western Europe, its fabrics a coveted treasure in the courts of the less sophisticated feudal kingdoms to the north. Simultaneously, the thread found another path, a sea route. By the 12th century, the island of Sicily, a cultural crossroads in the heart of the Mediterranean, was conquered by the Normans. They captured skilled silk weavers from Greece and the Arab world, establishing royal workshops in the capital of Palermo. Here, another unique fusion occurred. Norman, Byzantine, and Islamic artistic styles blended together, creating silks that featured bizarre and wonderful creatures, griffins, centaurs, and exotic birds, all woven with a vibrant, multicultural energy. The secret was unraveling, thread by thread, moving like a slow, patient vine of knowledge, seeking new soil in which to grow. The final, decisive leap into the heart of Europe came during the turbulent time of the Crusades and the decline of Byzantine power. In the 13th and 14th centuries, the burgeoning city-states of Italy, Venice, Genoa, and Lucca saw their opportunity. Through a combination of trade, diplomacy, and industrial espionage of their own, they brought the art of sericulture to Italian soil, and it was here, in the crucible of the Renaissance, that silk found its most dynamic and revolutionary expression. Imagine the city of Lucca in the 15th century. Its narrow, winding streets are filled with the constant, rhythmic clatter of thousands of wooden looms. The entire city's economy is dedicated to silk. Its merchants and bankers become fantastically wealthy, their power rivaling that of princes. Silk is no longer solely the domain of emperors and clergy. It is now the chosen fabric of a new class, the wealthy merchant, the powerful banker, the celebrated artist. It is a symbol not of inherited divine right, but of earned success, of worldly sophistication and exquisite taste. The artists of the Renaissance fell in love with silk. Look at the portraits by Titian or Bronzino. See how the painters obsessed over capturing the precise way a silk gown falls in luxurious folds, the way it catches the light, the deep, rich luster of a crimson velvet, or the shimmering translucence of a silk organza. To paint silk accurately was a demonstration of the highest artistic skill. The fabric itself becomes a protagonist in the art of the era. It speaks of the wealth, power, and burgeoning humanism of the age. From Italy, the knowledge made its final great migration north. King Francis I of France, jealous of the Italian monopoly, invited skilled weavers to the city of Lyon, establishing a royal industry that would, over centuries, make Lyon the new silk capital of Europe. It was in Lyon that new innovations, like the jacquard loom, would eventually automate the weaving of complex patterns, paving the way for the Industrial Revolution. The secret that had begun in a quiet Chinese garden was now the engine of a continental economy. As the centuries passed, silk's role continued to evolve. The arrival of new, man-made fibers like nylon and rayon in the 20th century meant that silk was no longer a necessity for many applications. It returned, in a way, to its origins, a symbol of pure luxury. And yet, the legacy of this ancient thread is woven into the fabric of our modern world in ways we rarely consider. Its strength and lightness made it the material of choice for the first parachutes, allowing aviators to escape from falling planes. Its non-allergenic properties and incredible tensile strength have made it a valuable material for medical sutures. Fine threads of silk are still used to stitch together delicate tissues in surgery. The very structure of its proteins is studied by scientists in the field of biomaterials, seeking to replicate its remarkable properties. The Silk Road it created did more than just transport goods. It was the conduit through which Buddhism traveled to East Asia, Islam spread, and Christianity was carried by Nestorian missionaries. It was the path that Marco Polo followed. It was the network that transmitted the Black Death, but also the technologies of papermaking, the compass, and gunpowder that would reshape the West. The world we live in today, a world of interconnected economies and blended cultures, is a direct descendant of that first dusty path paved with the desire for a shimmering thread. It was the first true globalization. And so, our long journey comes to an end. We have followed this single thread, from the teacup of an ancient empress, through the palaces of emperors, across the deadliest deserts and highest mountains, into the secret workshops of rival empires, and finally, into our own modern age. It is a story that reminds us of the quiet power of small beginnings, that a creature as humble as a worm, feasting on the leaves of a single type of tree, could produce a substance that would define luxury, topple economies, build roads, and connect the great civilizations of the earth. It is a testament to the profound and often invisible threads that bind our shared human story together. The next time you happen to touch a piece of silk, perhaps a scarf, a tie, or the lining of a coat, take a moment. Feel its impossible smoothness, its surprising warmth. See the way it plays with the light, and perhaps, if you listen closely enough, you can still hear the faint echo of its incredible journey, the whisper of a goddess in a quiet garden, the patient munching of a humble worm, and the rhythmic clatter of 1,000 looms, weaving the very fabric of our world. Now, just rest. Let the story fade, like a dream upon waking. Let the silence hold you, and sleep.